no mami kwe. David Nana, oh, Kakumadi Musoluma, David Nana, Kamusolu Iriwa. Faiverta wame na kuka kwad bapanga, Faiverta wame na chita kwad bapise. Unsangu mfurambe tsula no mamikwe. Unsangu mfurambe pawazi kudapwese. Aye wa Faiverta makoro ka akiriyara. Aye wa Faiverta makoro ka ere yara. Niba fara komda foyele. Faiverta. Kombi pisa gunda fo. Faiverta. So you can't go Faiverta. Senekela you can't go Faiverta. Faiverta nana o kakumade musoluma. Faiverta nana kamusolu iriwa. Faiverta wame na kuka kwad bapanga. Faiverta wame na chika kwad bapise.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our event today. It is called In Conversation About Gender Equality. My name is Tara Spreckerhoff, and I am pleased to be joined here with Caroline Montpetit and Alimata Konate. And we're excited to talk about gender equality and the wrap up of one of our projects this year. Now, before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. So this event will be done in French and English, so it's bilingual, and this is because we have members of our team who speak both languages that we were excited to talk about today. So as part of that, in order for you to understand everything, if you speak one or the other language, we're going to ask that you choose your language of interpretation. Alors, je vais commencer par dire que cet événement sera bilingue aujourd'hui. Et je vous demande de choisir.
I will start saying that this event will be.
So you can do that. You can see how to do that on the screen. There is a little globe at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. You can choose it. It says interpretation on it. And you can choose your language. If you are joining us from a cell phone, you can do the same thing. You'll just have to click the 3 dots on the right side of your screen. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. And while you're doing that, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Tara Spreckerhoff, as I said before. I'm the Senior Communications Specialist at Farm Radio. I've worked here for the past almost 5 years. Doing communications work. And I'm very pleased to talk to you today, or to bring to your attention today the work of 2 other women that I've had the pleasure of working with over those past 5 years. So Caroline Montpetit and Alimata Konate. And we're talking to them about some of the ways that our work and one of our projects in specific has really reached out to women to ensure that their voices are heard and that their voices are amplified. Throughout the event today, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you might have. We're excited to pose those questions to our guests towards the end, and so we'll be collecting them and making sure that they are available for you. And just a note, as you can see before, we have Sarah Karambi, one of our translators, doing live translation throughout the event. So you can choose your language that you're the most comfortable with. The first part of this will be in English, and the second part will be in French. So we're starting in English. So I'll stop sharing. If you have any questions about translation, feel free to pose them in the chat at any given moment. So I'd like to start by introducing Caroline Montpetit. Caroline has more than a decade of experience working in international development, working in programs, and ensuring that gender equality can be included in those programs. She's currently Farm Radio's head of project implementation and our gender equality advisor. It's a mouthful of a title, but it means a lot, and she means a lot to us. Caroline oversees Farm Radio's programming across sub-Saharan Africa and helps to integrate gender equality across our work. So welcome, Caroline.
Hello.
And as of course you know, we'll be talking to Alimata a little bit later on, so I'll save that introduction for then. But Caroline, you know, I've just given a mouthful of your title. You know, you're talking about program implementation. We're talking about gender equality. Can you give us a high-level overview of gender equality programs at Farm Radio? What are they? What are we doing when it comes to gender equality?
Yes. So, you know, as experts in communication for development, we are really committed to promote gender equality and advance women's rights. And because that, we think radio and ICT is a great opportunity to be providing the right kind of information to women, provide them with a space to be heard at a large scale, and address issues of inequalities that can create, you know, a long-lasting change. But even if radio is one of the best ways to reach marginalized communities with, you know, essential information, it can be in local language and reach them wherever they are. We have to understand that radio remains a media that is largely dominated by men, and so it has a, you know, potential to perpetuate stereotypes. So for us, it's very important to develop and implement specific measures for gender equality that will create the right environment for women to be heard, for them to be able to participate in public discussions, and to really benefit from the information that is provided on the air. We want women to be able to use this space so that they can share the experience and share their knowledge with others. And we also think that radio can be a great tool to challenge social norms and promote gender equality. So over the years, we've developed and we've tested and we scaled out various strategies that can allow us to better serve women and also to be talking about gender equality on the air. So that includes doing gender-based analysis so that we really understand the social cultural context in which we operate and what women need and what they want. We've also developed and delivered training resources for our partner radio stations so that they know how to amplify women's voice and they know how to talk about gender equality. And, you know, we use different type of radio programming depending on what we want to do. So, you know, we've also developed various ways of assessing the impact on the communities that we work for. So this means that we have some projects that are sometimes, you know, more dedicated to adaptation to climate change, or they're talking about agricultural challenges, but we do that in a way that engage women and discuss how gender equality issues are very tied to those climate change or agricultural challenges as well. And we have other kind of projects that are really focusing on how can we reduce inequalities. So we will work on how to reduce barriers to accessing sexual and reproductive health and rights services, or how to prevent and address gender-based violence.
I'm muted. As I mentioned prior to us launching this webinar, we wanted to start really wide and look at Farm Radio from a whole overview, and then really narrow in our focus as we go through the conversation today. And so you just talked about the two different types of programs we run, or at least two types of programs. One, you know, ones that include gender equality when we're focusing on food security, but also ones that really have gender equality at the heart of their programs. And arguably, we just finished one program that does a little bit of both. And we wanted to dive into a little bit more about that project today. So can you tell us what that project is and a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so this project is called Scaling Her Voice on Air, and it was a 5-year project implemented in Mali and Burkina Faso, in Senegal and in Ghana, with funding from Global Affairs Canada. And the project was aiming to solve what can sometimes sound a bit basic, but often overlooked rural development challenge, which is access to quality information and communication services that is provided in good time for men and for women, specifically women, in a way that can also address gender equality issues and promote women as leaders in rural development, so that communities can make informed decisions for themselves about how to improve their health and their economic development. So radio and ICT can really offer a good service to provide information that is at scale. But to really be able to have an impact, it has to be done in a specific manner that engage rural communities. So what we tried to do in this project was to create what we called a platform. So we were working with the radio stations, local radio stations, rural stakeholders that were involved in food security and gender equality, and rural communities themselves, so that we would all come together and provide an effective, interactive radio platform. That means we provided support and coaching, training to local radio stations so that they can produce the best version of their farmer radio programs in a way that meaningfully engaged women, and that was also able to address issues of gender equality along the way. We also mobilized rural stakeholders, including women's organizations, so that they could share their knowledge with the radio stations in order to improve content, but also use radio to amplify their work and reach more people with what they are doing, and at the same time, get real-time feedback from rural communities, because a big aspect of our work is the interactive component using mobile phone, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But that allows communities and listeners to express themselves, and that is very valuable for rural actors in rural development to improve what strategies they are doing for the communities. And then we work with communities themselves so that we would better understand their need and their priorities and support them, and mainly women, at using technology so that they can engage in a dialogue that was happening on the air and share their experience with others.
You mentioned, one of the things we really wanted to do was work with local communities and really bring in their opinions into this project. And, we all know that you can't develop a project for women without including those voices in the actual project design. So how did we decide what went into these programs?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. We don't see ourselves as necessarily the one that will decide the content. To the contrary, we are communication specialists. So what we want to do here is facilitate the process among those who have knowledge, those who have the needs, and those who can share in a meaningful way information and provide space to be heard. So we began by research. We went into the communities that we wanted to serve with the radio program and asked them what they wanted, what kind of challenges they were facing with regards to food security and gender equality, which radio station they liked to listen, what kind of strategies they had tried and didn't work, and how did they use technologies like mobile phone and how useful it was, who was their trusted source of information, all of that so that we could design radio program that was really responding to what they needed. And then we went to do further research, gender-based analysis, so that we would really dig into the power dynamics and really understand what were the specific challenges that women and other marginalized groups were facing. And all of that so that we could meaningfully respond to what they wanted and let them shape the radio program. And then we moved into the design process, and that usually entails bringing together the stations, representatives of the stakeholders and those involved in food security and gender equality, and the communities to work together to design the radio series. And explore, what will be discussed on the air, who will be coming in to be discussing which aspect, what kind of interactions will we be having, and how each episode can address issues of gender equality. We also did polls during the radio programs. A big portion of our work, as I mentioned before, is the interactive component. So that also allowed us along the way to understand the level of satisfaction from listeners and also get more information from them about their priorities at the very moment, what they wanted to hear, if they had more questions, and then adapt the content of the radio program. And then finally, we do monitoring and evaluation, which means that we visit the communities that we are serving, and we take the time to meet with the listeners and ask them questions so that we better understand, is the radio program currently answering your issues? Does this reflect your local context, and what is it that you need, so that we can make sure that the rest of the radio programs are responsive to their needs.
One of the parts of that I want to pull out is just that, when it came to deciding what was on the programs, literally it was just, we asked the communities what they wanted. When I had the chance to visit Senegal, and I think Caroline was there with me, where communities asked for programs on sanitation so that they could ensure that their kids weren't getting sick anymore and things like that. And that was just one example of what communities asked for. So, when we think about the programs, what were actually on these programs? We asked communities, they told us. So what were we airing programs actually on?
It was, the topics were different from one country to another, because essentially what we wanted to do was to create those radio programs to be always at the same time. And this is where you would find the information that you need for your food security, for your gender equality concerns. We produced over 1,600 episodes during this project, and it varied from post-harvest management, best nutritional practices, how to access and use improved seeds, composting, but we also talked about gender-based violence and land ownership and gender division of labor and women's space and decision making. So, we had different kind of radio programs depending on the topic and what we wanted to address. Some were more magazine styles, but we also had radio drama that were produced. And one of the approach that we use so that we would be sure to be addressing gender equality issues in what we call maybe more typical farmer program, focusing more on the agricultural side, was an approach called Her Voice on Air. And with this approach, what we want to do is create space within each radio program so that we make sure that we hear from women's voice and we hear about gender equality issues. So we worked with women-led community listeners groups, and every week we would give them a question with regards to the topic of the episode that was coming up. And together in group, they talked about this, and then they decided on what they wanted to share, questions or, comments. It could be song, and they would record this on their phone and send through WhatsApp to the local radio station. And of course, we provided them with support on how to use those technologies. And then during the program, we would be sure to air those messages that we received from women. And that was one way to ensure that we hear more women's voice and that we were able to dig into the details of how the topic of the week was impacted by gender equality issues. So, overall, those programs were always meant to feature local partners that were involved in food security and gender equality, but also, promotes the voice of the communities that were listening, so that what you hear is not just somebody from the capital city telling you how to do ABC, but it was maybe your neighbor that tried something and that you wanted to learn from. So that was an interesting component of it.
Yeah, one of the other approaches that you mentioned there are radio dramas, and I always find this fascinating. Can you tell us about why we would use radio dramas to do some of this information-based work?
Yes, when we want to cover sensitive topic, it's easier to do so with radio drama because you can use a story that is fictional in theory, but that is with characters that are living in a similar context than what you are experiencing right now. And so it allows us to explore various topics and explore various kind of reactions that people would be having in a way that is entertaining and that is adapted to what's happening in the current context. And that's usually what we use when we want to talk about things like gender-based violence or women's space and decision-making. So with this project, we produced about 99 episodes of radio drama that were aired during the programs, and it was followed by an interactive component where we were going into more details of the topic that were addressed during the drama. So the topic itself differed from one country to another, but all of them touched on the issues of gender-based violence and the specific challenges that women in rural areas were facing. Looking as well into land ownership issues with regards to women's rights, and again, women's decision-making space when you're talking about how to market the products or what to do with the revenues of selling your farm product. And thanks to those radio drama, we were able to see some interesting changes in terms of knowledge regarding women's rights and importance of joint decision-making within the households.
Cool. Now we're going to dive into some of the actual stories from the project a little bit later, but can you tell me kind of overall what results we saw from this project?
Yeah, we were able to reach about 2.9 million women and men farmers with quality interactive radio services that were provided by 21 radio stations. And because of that, we were able to see some changes in the number of people that were food insecure and see some reduction in gender inequalities as well. So we looked at what were the difference in terms of decision-making, in terms of women's confidence, their access to information, that all had improved. Some of those changes vary from one country to another. Once again, we saw some bigger changes in one country regarding gender-based violence and more changes in other regarding women's confidence or access to information. But overall, we saw some positive changes. We do acknowledge that this is not just thanks to the radio program, but it's also the work that is being done by our rural radio station partners and stakeholders that have been doing this work for a long time as well. So the environment was right to be able to see some big difference being done. But overall, 90% of our partner radio stations and local stakeholders said that they felt that the interactive radio services that were provided were very useful and sustainable. So that's been very encouraging for us.
And I just see a question about this. Can you remind me how many episodes we did for this project?
Over 1,600 episodes.
Wow, that's incredible. And, that's a lot of work, a lot of really impressive results. Caroline, you yourself have been working on this project for 5 years. When I started at Farm Radio, this was probably one of the first things we talked about. It's the end of it. What has this project meant to you, and what has it meant to the people that you work with?
I think thanks to this project, we were able to evolve a lot in terms of how we address gender equality within the organization. We developed new training for broadcasters. We developed new strategies of engaging with women's rights organization. One interesting component of this project was all of the work done with the stakeholders. Usually they are part of the design process, but in this project, we were able to experience, how can we be of service to them? How can, for instance, women's organization use interactive radio to amplify their work, which was a very interesting portion of it. But to me, seeing the impact of how women felt more confident in participating in the radio program is just something that's been very impressive for me to see. Some radio programs, when you look at the level of interaction at the beginning of the project, sometimes it was about 10% of interactions being done by women. And at the end, we could see rates going up to 55% of interactions done by women, which to me is a good example that if you give space for women and you give them the support that they need to take part in space and online, on-air discussion, they will take the space and they have a lot to say.
Amazing. So I could talk about this all day, but I think it would be way more interesting to hear Alimata talk about it, considering I'm here in snowy Ottawa and Alimata is based, where we're working on this in Burkina Faso. So I'm going to invite Alimata up. The next section will be done in French. So if you're joining us and are bilingual, you can go back to where you've clicked English and switch over to French if you'd like to hear them in the original language. If not, you can continue listening in English and we'll have live interpretation. Just a reminder that that's at the bottom of your screen. There's a globe and you can click your language of choice. And now I'll introduce Alimata. Alimata is our digital innovation team lead for Francophone West Africa. She is based in Burkina Faso and has done just a ton of work over the past several years in finding ways to include women in our programming, in finding ways to amplify their voices using technology. So I'll pass the microphone over to Caroline and Alimata for the next section.
Okay. Bonjour, Alima.
Bonjour. Hi, Alimata. Hi, Caroline. So this has been a few years now. We have been working together. And Alimata, please, can you talk a bit about you for those who don't know you? My name is Alimata Konate. I am the regional leader of digital innovation. I am also the gender focal point for Farm Radio International regarding our project implementation in countries. I support our teams so that they can use digital solution regarding how they can support radio stations to make sure that people are interacting more with the radio programs they are offering to their audiences. So regarding the interaction with the communities, we make sure that there are more interaction. So how do you manage that we make sure women are participating more in the radio programs? So we have a tool we call Uliza, and this tool is used on a platform. So this tool is used to collect people concerns so that we can later took it to the decision makers, for examples. With Uliza, why do we choose this solution? Because when we speak about communication, with communication, we need to have interaction. And we know radio is used as a tool to cover a large audience. And this allows more people to participate. And for development, we don't only need to stick to just hearing or sharing information. We also need people to react to this information, to share, and also to make their concerns known to you. In our side, we know that radio stations not always have resources to make the audience concerns known to decision maker, for example. So, to avoid people to face limitations or barriers, what we do on our side is to see how they can have resources and to have tools to analyze people and communities' concerns. And this is where we provide tools for surveys and also tools to help populations to express their opinions and their concerns. And this is where Uliza is used as a platform to do these concern collection and analysis. And also, after they collect these concerns, they are able to produce, for example, programs which will take into account these challenges and also provide solutions to these challenges. We also have services which support this platform. We have a series of tools which support Uliza. For example, some services are there to send alerts. For example, as part of the Scaling Her Voice project, there were some alerts which were sent to women to tell women that they had some questions to which they were asked to provide responses. So, for example, when these responses were ready, women were asked to listen in order to get the right information. So these answers were coming sometimes from specialists from London. We also have some services which are due for surveys. So for scaling her voice, we wanted to make sure that women were participating a lot. We know that it's important to have projects for women, but it's also important to make sure that women are implementing and involved in these projects. So how do you manage to make sure that they participate to the programs? For the project implementation, but our real experience was to make sure that we help women face their challenges, because in the past we noticed that women were not participating a lot. So how could we make sure that they would be encouraged to participate? How could we make sure that this barrier would be eliminated? Because not all of women would feel at ease to express themselves. Sometimes also we have the access issue, and since phones are tools for us to collect information, we try to see how to help women use the phones they have with them. We also know that they are not always educated. They don't have the necessary education to use phones. For example, if you want a woman, some women, to make a number on a phone, if she doesn't know how to make this number, how could she use the phone? In Mali, for example, many people are using smartphone, but if in rural areas they don't know how to use a smartphone, how to make sure that they can participate to the programs? So, for example, we also have the challenge of women who are afraid of not speaking on air, because we know that usually speaking, men are those who speak on air. So how can we encourage women to speak on air? In this regard, we needed to find a solution to encourage women participation to our radio programs. So all of this led us to find ways to encourage them to use Uliza. So we did find ways to listen to the radio programs and to use Uliza to voice their concerns. Also, for the radio drama, we try to describe, for example, tools. We try to explain to women listening groups how to use the phone numbers. So can you tell more about your visits with the communities? How do the radio stations mobilize to get women participation? To tell you small stories. At the beginning, I was not aware of some of these challenges because for women who were not at school, we didn't know that they could not use phone per se. So they had to rely on their husband or other people in the community to use the phones. We know that for radio programs, there is a short time. So how can we make sure that they could call during, for example, a radio program to share their concerns? So luckily, we had some community listening group in some of the areas. So what we did was that to make use of this community listening group and to explain to them how to use Uliza. So when we explain them how to use Uliza, we made some experiences with them. So after these experiences, I noticed how they were managing. So we had a man who were training them a little bit. But what we noticed was that women really wanted to participate, but they couldn't do it. So what this man proposed was to written the number on small sheets of paper and to give it to women by showing them the numbers. And so women meet with these sheets and they will look at the numbers and they will look at their phones and see how these numbers look like. And then after, when they want to make the number on the phone, they will know how to do it. So this is why, how they manage themselves to make the number, to call to the radio station, to voice their challenge after they listen to a radio program. So this helped them a lot, even when they didn't know how to written or they didn't understand a language, for example. So radio stations take this opportunity in some areas to write the phone number on papers and share them with some community listening groups. This is a good example of how you manage to improve women participation to the radio programs. This is really encouraging. So when women were participating to the radio programs, what were their comments? As I mentioned it, women were not participating a lot at the beginning, but thanks to the approaches we put into place, this increased their participation. Based on the data we were collecting on the platform, we noticed that some of the questions we were asking helped us collect more answers. So we noticed that women answers were really plenty of content, were really giving us more resources to use, because they were talking a lot about their challenges and concerns. For example, sometimes they wanted to know more about some topics. And for example, after some radio programs were heard, we were having some surveys. And after the answers and they completed these surveys, we noticed that we were asked to provide more resources, more information to the topics which were covered in a radio program. This led radio station to deepen the subjects covered in the programs. For example, for land access, we know that sometimes women don't have access to land every time. So some radio programs propose land preparation topics. So this helps more women to know more about how to prepare land and also how to control pests. So when they don't have means to buy chemicals, they will know how to prepare, for example, bio products to control these pests. Many women also didn't have the courage to express themselves, but thanks to the Uliza platforms, they could do it freely and with more confidence. And also, they could share their solutions they had without fearing of being, for example, having some problems with their men or husbands. Many topics really interested them, but due to the cultural practices or behavior, they couldn't share their experiences or solutions. So the Uliza platform helped them share, and this being confident that they wouldn't have any retaliation from anybody. So the radio programs were an opportunity for women to share, to get information, and to get knowledge. And this helped them face challenges they had. And we also noticed that challenges differed from men to women. And women were now aware of the fact that they didn't have the same challenges than men, which was not the case in the past. I could say that many more information were shared, and this helped people become aware of the fact that things were different if we were talking about men or women. But I can say that this was a rich experience for women. And Alimata, you had the opportunity to meet many women, female farmers. What did you notice as changes when you met them? So I noticed many things. First of all, whenever you I met them, I had the sense that they were freed, because they said that even when I cannot say something freely in front of other people, at least thanks to the radio program and thanks to the Uliza platform, at least I can express my view and I can express my concern. And this helps bring changes because they can share among themselves. And also, thanks to the radio programs, they were able to hear about success stories from other women. And this was a way for those who wanted to undertake activities to have courage, because they saw that this was possible due to the fact other women did it before them. And this encouraged many of them to launch their activities. Another impact was that it helped improve communication, because through radio programs, they were able to communicate more with radio stations, because they couldn't do it individually speaking. Also, for extension services, this improved collaboration with farmers, for example, and also women, because radio were a means for extension services to provide more information to farmers. Communities were able, through Bluetooth or other technologies, to record and also download resources which could help them improve their practices. All this, I think, has helped radio stations to be more responsible and to be more accountable towards farmers and their audiences. And we know that when you are accountable towards your audiences, you will not do things as you used to do it, because you know that people will be asking you questions. And another point we can also mention is that radio stations are there to make more promos, because as part of the project Scaling Her Voice, we encourage the radio stations to provide a channel for them to make promos on women's success stories. During even regular radio programs, women could call and share their other concerns, even when these were not farming concerns. And I think that we could keep discussing all these impacts the Scaling Her Voice project had on women, and all these, the changes this project brought about. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. There's so much interesting things going on there, and so much to learn. And I'd love to keep talking to Alimata and Caroline. We have more questions we could ask them. But on that note, we wanted to open up our questions to you, the people who have joined us today. So you have a few different options of ways to ask questions. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen that you can submit a question to. You can also throw one into the chat and we'll keep an eye there. Or I think you have the option to raise your hand as a participant and we can unmute you, then give you the option to ask your question live. So you can consider those questions. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to ask Caroline a question that we've already received in the Q&A box. This is a question outside of the scope of the Scaling Her Voice on Air project, but it is within the scope of work we're doing at Farm Radio about sexual and reproductive health. So the question comes from Nora Files, and she asks, she says she's interested in our work on sexual and reproductive health for adolescents, girls, and boys, particularly in Malawi, and in particular radio skits and messaging about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so can you speak a little briefly about the I Heard project as an example of one of our projects in this space?
Yeah, so the I Heard project, it's another one that is funded by Global Affairs, and it's done in collaboration with CODE and with Mary Stokes for Reproductive Choices. So this project has three pillars. We're addressing the communication needs, obviously through radio programming and technologies like mobile phone. We are also addressing the issues on the educational side, and then on the health side, so working with MSI and their local partner to be providing the best services as possible to adolescents regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights. And so through this project, we're working with a lot of partners so that we can provide a harmonized response to this challenge. And broadcasting various radio programs and that includes drama as well. We're working at the country level with Girl Effect, producing some very interesting drama series that will feature adolescents' lives and their voices in the process, so that we can touch on all of the different components regarding sexual and reproductive health and rights. And that also includes addressing issues of gender-based violence, where to get access to services at your local level, so what is around you, and how they can build together a better understanding of the notions around consent, for example, and sexual and reproductive health challenges that they may be facing.
Thanks, Caroline. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? Feel free to raise your hand. Oh, a question from Jean Christie, who just popped up. She says, wonderful practical examples. Thank you, Alimata. And she wonders if Alimata could have a little bit more to say about how Farm Radio and our partner radio stations have dealt with any resistance from men to the programming we've done. So do we see resistance from men to programming that's about gender equality? And if so, how do we deal with it? And that's a question for Alimata. And I think Sarah's just translating the question into French at the moment, so.
D'accord. Alors, avant même de commencer à donner les émissions,
before even start hearing the radio programs, radio stations have been trained, because we know that some issues which were going to be covered in the radio programs were sensitive. So we trained the radio stations on gender issues so that they could involve and make sure community leaders were involved. And also we make sure that they invite gender specialists to contribute with right information resources. So, before covering any sensitive topic, sometimes we make sure that during the surveys we implemented, for example, if we had some groups made up with women only, we make sure that these women were in security. So we make sure that the answers were given anonymously. So we did a lot of preparation, and we also make sure that we shared the right information regarding the rights of each group. We cannot say that per se we did face some resistance from men, because previously we did some training, we did some raising awareness with women to make sure that everyone understood well what we did want to do, mainly with community leaders and men, to make sure that everyone understands the benefits of what we wanted to do and why we want women to be involved and why it was interesting for them to be involved. Thank you.
Thanks, Alimata. Maybe I'll ask a little bit and expanded on that. I know, in the past, not in Scaling Her Voice, but we've run things like the Best Husband competition. And I know we're thinking about approaches that involve positive masculinities. So maybe, Caroline, is there more that we're trying to do to bring men into the fold when it comes to improving gender equality?
Yeah, exactly. I think Alimata already started to give very good examples. And one of the reasons why we started looking into this a little bit more is that when we did the midterm evaluation for Scaling Her Voice, one of the things that came up is that on the series that were focusing specifically on gender equality issues, we had seen some listening-ship rates from men reducing a little bit. And when asked about why, they said that they thought this was not meant for them. While to the contrary, if you're talking about gender equality in women's rights, it is meant for everybody. And like Alimata said, you cannot really have a change unless everybody is on board. And so for us, things like this Good Husband contest is a good example on how we can promote a positive image of men being involved in supporting their wives, supporting, their family and their health. And so for us, it's all about finding maybe creative ways of doing so in a fun and entertaining way, so that men can also be a part of the process. And that may means having guest speakers on the air about how are men supporting women empowerment, for example, or gender equality, and what is the role of men in preventing gender-based violence. That also means when we are doing radio drama, for instance, to make sure that we have a good representation and different characters that will play the role of, typical issues that we may find in communities with regards to how men are reacting and how women are reacting to violence, for example, and make sure that everybody feel like they can hear themselves in what we are talking about.
So I think that brings us right up to the top of the hour. Alimata, the examples that you provided were so clear and so illustrative of the work that we're doing. Caroline, thank you so much for your overview of the type of work we're doing in gender equality. I know you're both two women who are really leading the way when it comes to this at our organization, among a variety of people behind the scenes on the teams that you work with in Ottawa, in Africa, in Europe even, who are doing this work. And so congratulations on the end of this project. I'll leave us with a quick note from Louise, who is the daughter of George Atkins, Farm Radio's founder, who says that he himself would have been very happy with the success of this project, including the way that Farm Radio surmounted obstacles like enabling women to just simply be able to put and dial in a phone number to their phone in order to participate. So keep up the good work. Before we end, I just want to do a couple of different thank yous. Thank you to Sarah, who has been translating all that we had to say. We really appreciate that support. We have a behind the scenes team at Farm Radio, at our communications and fundraising team, who've been supporting us with all the technical elements of this. Of course, a thank you to Global Affairs Canada and the Government of Canada, who put the funding towards this project so that we were able to really do this work. And finally, a thank you to our donors, those of you who have joined us today. You're among the group that allows us to do this on a regular basis, that allows us to try new things within these projects. Sometimes our projects don't quite have enough support, and we need that extra donations in order to be able to try different innovative techniques and work, like the work that Alimata is doing in order to improve what we're doing. So we really appreciate this support. And finally, if you want to learn more about the Scaling Her Voice on Air project from a slightly more technical standpoint, we will be doing another webinar on this at the end of the month on the 29th. That will really dig into the hows and the whys, that will showcase a bunch more staff who've worked on this project. We'll hear from a radio station and things like that. So you can stay tuned if you'd like to join us for that webinar as well. But without further ado, that brings us to 1 o'clock, 1:01 even. So I hope you pass a lovely afternoon. And again, thank you to Alimata and Caroline for joining us today.
Thank you.
Just going to